Huh? Okay. Hare Krishna. Welcome, Mother Bhakti Devi. How many rounds got to do? I see. Okay, devotees. Oops. So, devotees, we are starting the 4th volume of Srila Prabhupada-lilamrita. I'll just read from my computer. So, I mean, you're all welcome to stay, of course. More than welcome. But if anyone has things they need to do, that's also fine, of course. And one of the days, we will make some halava. Do you like the halava, or is it sort of, kind of like, well, so what? Too sweet. You're diabetic? Oh, you are? Wow. Really? I didn't know that. Okay. So, for everyone else? I mean, you don't need to just say nice things to be nice, but... Oh, gosh. There are formulae, Oh, yeah. It's a way of doing it. I mean, we could make something else, I suppose. I don't know. Okay, so devotees. We are starting Srila Prabhupada-lilamrita, Volume 4, which is titled In Every Town and Village Around the World from 1968 to 1971. And it begins, would you believe, in August 1968. Gosh, a whole lot of time has passed, because up till now, these first 3 volumes, it's been pretty, pretty step by step, very step by step. I'm just checking, when did we leave off? When did Prabhupada fly? October. Yeah, October. Oh, okay, no, it's later than that. It's December something. Huh? Well, yeah, I think you're right, yeah. So, all right. So, yeah, that sort of detailed description. So, yeah, 14th of December, 67, in the middle of the day, Prabhupada arrived in San Francisco. And now the next incident here is August 68. It's a shame, because there's so much amazing detail. Actually, every day. Every day. Anyway, what to do? So this is now, it's actually in the whole book, if we look at the book as one whole, it's chapter 29. And in the book, there are 55 chapters. So in that sense, we are actually a little over halfway, you could say. So let's see how it goes. So chapter 29, unlimited opportunity, limited time. Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prestaya Bhutale Srimati Bhaktivedanta Swaminiti Namane Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharne Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschachadeshatarne Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Sri Advaita Gadadha Shivas Adi Gaura Bhaktivinoda Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Vanchakalpaturubhyascha kripa sindhubhya evacha patitanam pavanebhyo vaishnavebhyo namo namaha. Okay, so Montreal, August 1968, so means 8-9 months have passed. All right. Srila Prabhupada was in his room speaking with several disciples. So, Annapurna, you've got some news, he asked. Annapurna was a young British girl. A few months ago, her father had written from England that he might be able to provide a house if some devotees came there. Because the devotees didn't go to England till, I think it's, anyway, we'll find out shortly, but I think in 69. Right, so Annapurna, you got some news, he asked. Yes, she replied. So what is our next program? She was reticent. That letter from your father is encouraging. Yes, he encourages me, but he says he can't provide any place if we come there. A few months before he said he might be able to, but now he says not. Prabhupada looked disappointed. That's all right. It's up to Krishna. When we go to someone to preach, we have to stand before them with folded hands, with all humility. My dear sir, please take to Krishna consciousness. Prabhupada, Pradyumna spoke up. I was reading a book by this big atheist Swami. Okay. There's some letters in the back of the book and I was looking at them. Atheist Swami's book, Prabhupada said, we have nothing to do with. I wasn't looking at his philosophy, Pradyumna explained. I was just looking at the techniques he used when he was in America. Yeah, well, Pradyumna was a character, sure. Yeah, anyway, I won't get into it, but he was a character. Right. He wanted to go to Europe, so he had a man, a rich benefactor, who went on a 6-week tour of France, England, Germany, Switzerland, Holland, and then back, arranging lectures. That's how he did most of his tour. He had 1 or 2 influential people, and they arranged everything. And the lectures were arranged, and the society. So, you can arrange like that, Prabhupada asked. I was thinking that there would be a Royal Asiatic Society in London. I think Thakur Bhaktivinoda was a member of that. But where is Thakur Bhaktivinoda Sangha association? Prabhupada asked. Well, Pradyumna continued, still there may be some people you could open correspondence with. They might be interested in sponsoring you. Is there anything about Krishna in that Swami's speech? Prabhupada asked. No. Prabhupada sat thoughtfully. In England, he would have no place to stay. Pradyumna might talk of influential persons traveling ahead and making all the arrangements, but where were such persons? Here was a shy girl who could barely speak up, whose father would not help, and Pradyumna reading an atheist Swami and talking of a royal Asiatic society, but nothing practical. Prabhupada had plans, though. He had asked Mukunda and Shamsunda to go to London and try to establish an ISKCON center. They had agreed and would be traveling and would be arriving in Montreal from San Francisco in a few days. Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati, Prabhupada's own spiritual master, had wanted Krishna consciousness in Europe. During the 1930s, he had sent his most experienced sannyasis to London, but they had returned, nothing accomplished. It wasn't possible to teach Krishna consciousness to the Malechas, they had complained. Europeans couldn't sit long enough to hear the Vaishnava philosophy. One of the sannyasis had met Lord Zetland, who had inquired curiously, Swamiji, can you make me a Brahmin? The sannyasi had assured Lord Zetland he could, certainly, if Zetland would give up meat-eating, intoxication, gambling, and illicit sex. Impossible, Lord Zetland had replied. And the sannyasis had accepted this response as the standard for all Europeans. The sannyasis had returned to India. Vaishnavism could never take hold in the West. Prabhupada had faith that his disciples would succeed. They would help him establish ISKCON centers in Europe, just as they had in North America. Certainly such success would greatly please Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati. Prabhupada told of a man who found a gourd lying on the road and picked it up, and then found a stick and a wire and picked them up. In themselves, the three parts were useless, but by putting the gourd, the stick, and the wire together, the man made a veena and began to play beautiful music. Similarly, Prabhupada had come to the West and found some rejected youths lying here and there. And he himself had been rejected by the people of New York City. But by Krishna's grace, the combination had become successful. If his disciples remained sincere and followed his orders, they would succeed in Europe. 3 married couples, Mukunda and Janaki, Shamsunda and Malati, with their infant daughter, Saraswati, who's now 50 years old, more than 50 years old. And Gurudas and Yamuna arrived in Montreal, eager to travel to London. These three couples had begun the temple in San Francisco, where they had had close association with Srila Prabhupada. They had helped Prabhupada introduce kirtan, prasadam, and Ratha Yatra among the hippies of Haight-Ashbury. Now they were eager to help him introduce Krishna consciousness in London. Prabhupada asked the three couples to remain with him in Montreal for a week or two so that he could train them to perform kirtan expertly. Chanting Hare Krishna was not a theatrical performance, but an act of devotion, properly conducted only by pure devotees, not by professional musicians. Yet, if Prabhupada's disciples became proficient in their singing, Londoners would better appreciate Krishna consciousness. So, it's an interesting point. Prabhupada, like expertise, sophistication in music and so on. We'll say music particularly. Prabhupada didn't emphasize, but he rarely emphasized the sincerity, the devotion. But still, if devotees could become competent, then that was definitely a plus. Right. The thought of these devotees preaching in England made Prabhupada ecstatic. With their kirtan, they would become more popular than the yogis with their gymnastics and impersonal meditation. And in fact, that happened when the devotees were there. They would go out. Well, they were staying near the main street, near Oxford Street. First of all, in a small area called Covent Garden, and then they moved to Holborn, if you know London at all. And they would go, it was just a 5-minute walk to the main street, which is really quite a street. And they would go regularly and have Harinam down the main street. And George Harrison sometimes would drive past and see them. And he thought that these people, he was already interested in yoga and meditation, very interested and involved. But he thought these people are really sincere, particularly when he saw them during the winter, London's winter. It's very unpleasant. It's very damp, and it's cold. Sometimes snow, not much snow, but sometimes snow. I mean, every year, a few times, they have snow. Right. As the London program became a tangible fact, Prabhupada began to reveal more plans. Prabhupada already seemed to have hundreds of detailed plans for implementing Krishna consciousness around the world. He only needed willing helpers. In the daily kirtan rehearsals, so they were rehearsing, practicing, Prabhupada taught the devotees to chant Hare Krishna and other devotional songs, beginning with a slow tempo and building gradually. He would regularly interrupt and have them begin again, listening carefully as Yamuna led the chanting. Prabhupada would stop her at times to correct her Sanskrit pronunciation. After 2 weeks, so it's either August or September, after 2 weeks in Montreal, the London party came together for a final meeting with Prabhupada. He was sending them to start a center in London to fulfill his spiritual master's dream. The sannyasis Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati had sent to London, Prabhupada told them, had lectured in a few places, posed for photos with lords and ladies, and then returned to India. But Prabhupada wanted his disciples to go out boldly, chant the holy name, and attract others to chant. Lord Chaitanya had personally used this method while touring South India. Chaitanya Charitamrita describes that whoever saw Lord Chaitanya became ecstatic in love of God. Then that ecstatic person would chant the holy name and ask others to chant, and when they saw that person, they too would become ecstatic. Thus the waves of ecstatic love of Krishna would increase. Prabhupada predicted that when the devotees chanted Hare Krishna, the people of London would hear the mantra, become devotees, and then enlighten others. Krishna consciousness would grow. The only requirement was that the chanting be done purely, without any material motivation. Prabhupada's enthusiasm was contagious, and as he spoke, he filled his disciples with the same contagious enthusiasm. When Mukunda asked Prabhupada if he had any specific instructions, Prabhupada replied with a story. In his youth, he had once seen a movie of Charlie Chaplin. The setting was a formal ball held outdoors, and off from the main dance arena were lanes with benches where couples sat. Some mischievous boys had plastered glue on one of the benches, and a young man and his girlfriend came and sat down. When the young man got up, Prabhupada laughed as he told the story. His tails tore up the middle. Prabhupada told how the couple had returned to the dance, unaware of what had happened. But now they drew stares from the other dancers, wondering why he was suddenly attracting so much attention. The young man went into the dressing room and saw in the mirror his ripped coat-tails. Deliberately, he then tore his coat all the way up to the collar, returned to his partner, and began dancing exuberantly. Then another man joined, ripping his own coat-tails and dancing with his partner, as if to compete with the first couple. One by one, the other dancers followed, ripping their coat-tails and dancing with abandon. By the conclusion of the story, the devotees in Prabhupada's room were all laughing uproariously. But finally their laughter subsided and the meeting ended. Not until the devotees were already at the airport did Mukunda, talking with Shamsundar, began to appreciate and marvel at how expertly Prabhupada had answered his question. By their bold, enthusiastic, confident preaching, they would attract people. Not everyone would immediately join in the dancing, as had the people in the Charlie Chaplin film. The devotees might even be considered crazy at first, but they would be offering Krishna consciousness, the highest and rarest gift. And intelligent people would gradually appreciate this, even if at first they scoffed. There's a story, not told by Prabhupada, but it's a story. It's just a story about Charlie Chaplin. Charlie Chaplin, when he made one of his movies, for the premiere, the first night, he was there. And Albert Einstein came to the premiere of the Charlie Chaplin movie and met Charlie Chaplin. And they spoke together. And Charlie Chaplin told Albert Einstein that, the people really appreciate me because they understand me. And they really appreciate you because they don't understand you. And here, how about this? Now, Charlie Chaplin died. I don't know when he died. Was it Charlie? I think it was Charlie Chaplin. Charlie Chaplin died. Just see when Charlie Chaplin died. He was living in Geneva by the Lake Geneva. It's a famous lake there. And really? 25th? Okay, then what I was thinking is correct, because I was told a devotee was going door to door in Geneva, and he went out around the lake, because there's these big, wealthy people, big houses around the lake. It's very picturesque, and Geneva's such a famous place. He was just going door to door, knocking on doors, and he knocked on the door, and Charlie Chaplin came to the door and told him that I'm Charlie Chaplin. And he took, I forget what book it was, I think it was The Science of Self-Realization, but he took a book, and he was very pleasant with the devotee. And then the devotee, same devotee, came back maybe a year later or even a little more. And he knocked on the door, and Charlie Chaplin's wife came to the door. And she said, my husband passed away. And the devotee said, well, he took a book from me a while ago. Do you know if he read it at all? And the wife said, yes, oh yes, he read it, and he really appreciated it. Interesting. Right ho. By Srila Prabhupada's order, his London-bound disciples, holding kirtan in public, would present a profile quite different from the reserved profile of his sannyasi godbrothers. His godbrothers had imitated the British ways, but Prabhupada wanted the British to imitate the Vaishnavas. Some godbrother of Prabhupada's, when Prabhupada was talking to him, who had been to England and stayed there for some few years or whatever it was, told Prabhupada, you're going to have to learn how to eat with a knife and fork. And particularly how to deal with peas with a fork. Have you had much experience? It's a challenge. Yeah. Yeah, but Prabhupada was not impressed. To appear in the streets of London with shaven heads and dhotis would require boldness, but it would be exciting to chant, carrying out the order of Lord Chaitanya. And the people would follow gradually, but definitely. It was the will of Lord Chaitanya. Okay, so I'll read a little more. Srila Prabhupada's visit to Montreal took place early in the summer of 1968, 6 months after his return to America. In India from July to December of 1967, he had recovered his health, and on December 14th he'd returned to San Francisco. After a few weeks he had gone to Los Angeles, where a small group of disciples had opened a storefront temple in a middle-class Black and Hispanic neighborhood. The storefront was bare and the location secluded. Prabhupada had stayed there 2 months, delivering lectures, holding kirtans, and giving strength and inspiration to his disciples. Although a buzzing in his head had made working difficult, he had found the warm climate and sunshine agreeable, and had continued to translate Srimad Bhagavatam, dictating tapes and sending them to Boston for typing. A reporter from Life had come to Srila Prabhupada's apartment and interviewed him for an upcoming Life feature, The Year of the Guru. When the story had appeared, it had mixed Srila Prabhupada and his movement with coverage of other gurus. Although the article had carried a large color photo of Srila Prabhupada and favorably described a reporter's visit to the New York ISKCON Center, Prabhupada had said that being grouped with gurus who taught concoctions of yoga and meditation was not good. In May, a few months after leaving Los Angeles, Prabhupada had paid a first visit to his ISKCON Center in Boston. There also he had found a few disciples based in a small storefront. He had lectured at many of the local universities, including Harvard and MIT. At MIT, addressing a gathering of students and faculty, he had challenged, where in this university is there a department to teach scientifically the difference between a living body and a dead body? The most fundamental science, the science of the living soul, was not being taught. After Boston, Srila Prabhupada had come to Montreal, and after 3 months in Montreal, Prabhupada flew to Seattle, where he stayed for 1 month. Then he briefly visited Santa Fe, New Mexico, where the ISKCON Center was a tiny, isolated storefront. Prabhupada's reasons for traveling from center to center were to train and convince each disciple and to speak with newcomers. Many young people came to hear, but Prabhupada found the majority already ruined by illicit sex and drugs. They were rich men's sons, quote unquote, but they had become hippies, wandering the streets. By Krishna's grace, now some of them were being saved. Even while recuperating in India, Prabhupada had always thought of returning to America to continue his movement. The Indians had seemed interested only in sense gratification, like that of the Americans. But many American youths, disillusioned with their father's wealth, were not going to the skyscrapers or to their father's businesses. As Prabhupada had seen from his stay in New York City and San Francisco, Thousands of youths were seeking an alternative to materialism. Frustrated, they were ripe for spiritual knowledge. The devotees, still neophytes, knew nothing of spiritual life, and in most cases, very little of material life. But because they were sincerely taking to Krishna consciousness, Prabhupada was confident that their shortcomings would not prevent their spiritual progress. Although naturally beautiful, these Western youths were now dirty and morose. Their beauty had become covered. But the chanting of Hare Krishna was reviving them, Prabhupada said. Just as the monsoon revives the land of Vrindavan, making it fresh and verdant, and as the Vrindavan peacocks sometimes dance jubilantly, so the devotees, having shed their material bonds, were now ecstatically dancing and chanting the holy names. When a reporter asked Prabhupada if his disciples were hippies, Prabhupada replied, "No, we are not hippies, we are happies." More than a visiting lecturer or a formal guide, Srila Prabhupada was the spiritual father of his disciples. They accepted him as their real father, and he found them devoted and affectionate far more than his own family had been. These young American boys and girls, the flower of your country, Prabhupada called them, had received the blessings of Lord Chaitanya and were delivering that blessing to their countrymen. Prabhupada said it was up to his American disciples to save their country. He was giving them the method, but they would have to implement it. Srila Prabhupada loved his disciples and they loved him. Out of love, he was giving them the greatest treasure, and out of love, they were following his instructions. This was the essence of spiritual life. On the basis of this love, the Krishna consciousness movement would grow. Not surprisingly, some disciples had fallen away to their former materialistic way of living. But Prabhupada sought those sincere souls who would stay. That was the important thing, he said. One moon is more valuable than many stars. So even a few sincere workers could accomplish wonderful things. The sincere and intelligent would stay, and Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu would empower them to carry out his desires for distributing love of Krishna. In this way, the devotees' lives would become perfect. Many disciples, in fact, already felt this happening. Krishna consciousness worked because they sincerely practiced it, and because Srila Prabhupada carefully and patiently tended the growing plants of transcendental loving service he had planted in their hearts. Hare Krishna. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Any comment or question? Mataji, or just a moment? Give it to Mother Rangadevi.
Hare Krishna Maharaj. We see that in London and in America nowadays that it's mostly Indian population that's actually taking up to Krishna consciousness and filling the temples and doing the pujari work, service and all of those things. So I'm just wondering, is there maybe another approach to preaching in those areas now? Or?
Yeah, okay, that's a good point. It's true, it's very true. The hippie movement basically died quite some time ago, because 90% plus of these young people being described here who became devotees, they were hippies or something to do with hippies. You got a few like Jayananda Prabhu. He was a really solid and, sort of older 30 or 32-year-old young man, and he became a devotee, but not many of that sort. So, yeah. But now in America particularly, they're sort of leading the way of developing. I mean, there's a report from the American Yatra I've got somewhere just from a couple of months ago. It's really amazing things that are going on. But probably the main thing is they're really, really working on developing book distribution again, because the book distribution, which was the main way that people were becoming interested, hippies or whoever they were, including the hippies, was book distribution. And Prabhupada emphasized that. But it really dropped off drastically since, I think it's like after the mid-80s. But they're really developing book distribution in a big way. And as a result, more locals are becoming devotees. Yeah. And some are joining the temples, but, it's more like through Bhakti Vriksha and Namahata. People, Americans, are becoming devotees at home. So, of course, back in those days, these days, the days when Prabhupada was present, there were very few Indian people. In England there were, and they were into it, although we were mainly preaching to the local English people. But in America there were very few Indian people. But now America is, what would you call it? And anyway, it's the place for the Indian people to go, the qualified Indian people. And there's quite a few million of them there. It obviously can be checked on the internet, but I believe there's several million. Yeah. So it's a lot. And yeah, many of them are into it. Very many. So I would say, and not just I would say, but it's happening step by step, that the preaching to the local people is developing. But you get like in Russia, of course in Russia, other than Moscow, and even Moscow there's not a lot of Indian people, but other than Moscow, you don't get Indians in Russia. St. Petersburg, there's a few, and there's a couple of places where you get some, where there's universities specializing in medicine. A lot of Indian students come. I mean, not a lot really, but some. Otherwise, there's not an Indian if you travel. But people are becoming devotees in Russia, and they're local people. Yeah, in a big way. I was talking, still, it's been going on for years. I was speaking to someone yesterday or the day before. Oh yeah, yesterday. No, what? On Friday. My Russian teacher, he was talking about this, how in Russia, there's so many people becoming devotees, but Prabhupada disciples are not going to Russia because of COVID. Very few, or basically none. So in Russia, there's only 2 Russian gurus. And he was saying, it's such a problem. So many devotees, so many people becoming devotees. And after a while, they want to become initiated. But who's going to initiate them? So they want more of the local Russians to be allowed to initiate. Yeah, so it's not, like a universal thing. Where there's a lot of Indian people, America, England, there has been a lot for many years. They came from Kenya and Uganda. So many, hundreds of thousands. Yeah, I'd say hundreds of thousands. And there's still people coming from India. And, you can't stop them coming. What are we going to do? I remember back in Joburg, we had our temple in Muldersdrift, just outside Joburg, and the government people, the apartheid government people came because we were in a white area and we had non-whites. I mean, we had a real mixed crowd, actually, but there were it was probably 50% Indian and some white and some African and others. So they came and prosecuted us for breaking the laws. Yeah. Yes. And there was a case. They came to the temple and had the case there, and we lost the case. But we appealed. In the meantime, they told us that if we lose, they're not going to fine us yet, but if we lose the appeal, we'll have to pay 500 rands a day, which in those days, 500 rands is 500 rands, but in those days, it was worth a lot more. So we called a meeting of the congregation. There's not a lot of them. There's like 50 or 60, I suppose, who came regularly. About half of them were Indian. And we said to them, this is the situation. Would you mind not coming? And wow, they were just so not happy. They were really upset. So we didn't know what to do. So then the date for the appeal was coming up. But then you know what happened? Apartheid was given up.
Okay.
Yeah, that's what happened. And these people never contacted us again. They didn't contact us to say, okay, we're dropping the case. We just didn't hear from them again. Yeah. So, wherever there's pious Hindu people, they're going to come. They're definitely going to come and get into it, and many of them will become devotees. Yeah. And so, like here for many years, we were you could say almost only dealing with the Indian communities, because there were only so many of us, and there was so much preaching to do. And as a result, the other communities got neglected. So, in a sense, we don't really care what sort of people they are, as long as they're interested. If they're interested, we're interested in them. Yeah. So it's kind of like that in America, so many, virtually all of the temple devotees got married and left the temples. So as a result, the temples were and are basically empty. And then along come these interested people, expatriates. They're all coming directly from India, and they're all intelligent. They're all graduates, all of them. They're all graduates, and they're really intelligent, qualified people, and they're really interested, and many of them become devotees. And so the devotees just got caught up in dealing with them. But now they're making like a focused effort to develop the book distribution and the preaching in the broader communities. Can you take the mic from her? Any other comment or question? No. What's wrong? Not feeling well. To anything
that you spoke about.
Well, what is it?
One of our Krishna Kids children in Santon asked a question about dinosaurs that you answered, but I can't remember the second answer you gave, and more children keep asking me.
You mean where they went to?
Or where they came from. You mentioned from the churning of the ocean.
Oh,
when they were getting,
of the ocean of
yes,
milk.
And there was that war with the demons and the demigods.
Yeah, yeah.
But you gave two answers and I don't remember.
Neither do I.
Oh.
I guess they came from so many species came from the churning of the ocean of milk. And so many species came from, like the daughters of Daksha, the daughters of Manu, who we've been reading about. Yeah. I can't remember what I said.
All right.
Anyway, sorry.
That's okay.
Hare
Thank
Krishna.
you.
Yes.
Hare Krishna Maharaj. You mentioned Prabhupada going to Harvard and preaching there.
Going where?
Harvard.
Oh, Harvard, right.
And I was just wondering, how successful was he, especially in the higher universities, so to speak? Because as you said, 90% plus of the of the ISKCON devotees were hippies.
Yeah. I don't think many of them became devotees. Some of them did, but I don't think many of them became devotees. Yeah, but, we read about, I don't know if you were here actually, we read about Prabhupada visiting Stanford, which is also one of the better universities. Maybe not quite Harvard, but it's one of the much better ones. And the students loved it. They danced madly in the kirtan for an hour. But as far as becoming devotees, not so many became devotees. Although Srila Prabhupada did make the point that graduates, educated people would make good leaders of the movement. So he appreciated the preaching to the university students, the more intelligent young people. But I'm not aware of a lot of them becoming devotees, but a lot of hippies became devotees. Really a lot.
Okay, that's good. Thank you, Maharaj.
Hare Krishna. Hare Krishna, everyone. Srila Prabhupada ki jai.